Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to those of you who just joined us on Facebook Live, and those of you who are joining us on the webinar. Thank you. We are getting more and more people to join in. It is a little bit after 5 o'clock, so we're going to start. We want to welcome you to another session of the Symposium Filaments of the Atlantic Heritage here on PBBI at Fresno State. It has been a wonderful event so far. We've had lots of different presentations. I've been jumping from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom. And we've started Thursday and we will continue. It will culminate on Wednesday with our last session at 5 p.m. We're especially excited about this session for many reasons. And I know I say I'm excited about every session, and I am, okay? But this one, I'm exceptionally excited because I love the book. And this is an opportunity for us to talk about the book as it goes into the virtual world as well. But indeed, nothing like having this book right here in your hand. But it is another opportunity for those, and myself included, I'm sure lots of you that are following us, that more and more there's less space for the physical books. And so we find ourselves buying books online as well and reading them in our Kindle. And especially it makes it for when you go on a lengthy vacation, especially to the Azores, we have to worry about weight. Instead of taking 5 or 6 books, you have them all in one Kindle. So it makes it really handy. I want to welcome, of course, each and every one of you, and welcome to our guests. We're waiting for one more guest who is already online, so we'll get him as a panelist here real quick. And we are going to have, I believe, a really fun hour. So stick with us, and the chat is always available for you to let us know how any questions that you may have throughout the presentation. And there's our fourth panelist right there, our fourth participant. We're going to start. So we're here to launch the ebook of Land of Milk and Money. That's this most awesome, and I'll put it up here like this so you can see it, this most awesome novel by Anthony Barcellos, and the book was published a few years ago. Anthony will talk a little bit about that, and now it is available as an ebook, so you can get it through Amazon and any of those other services that are available. We're always plugging, even though we may not want to, we're always plugging Amazon. I wanted to thank, first of all, Jean and Daniel and our most amazing author, Anthony, for being here. Thank you all for taking time. If you'll permit me, I'm going to share my screen to share with each and every one of you a presentation that I will read, but it's not my presentation. As you will see, it is Catherine Baker. Catherine is a translator who has a very unique story from Pittsburgh, and where there aren't a lot of Portuguese, but a friend of mine just who lives in Ohio, where there's also not a lot of Portuguese, just sent me a wonderful story that I'm actually a couple of pictures I'm going to do a story on and feature her in the Portuguese press, which is a Portuguese cafe restaurant in Pittsburgh. Called Azores Cafe. Can you believe that? Azores Cafe in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I guess she is doing quite well, and just opened up about a year before the pandemic, but she's doing quite well with the Azorian Cafe. And we can't seem to have any of them in California, where there are Portuguese Americans, just about everywhere. But so I will go ahead and share this with you, and I'm going to, the comments I will make are Kathy's comments, but I think it's a very interesting in a very good way, and I thank Anthony for allowing this as well. He agreed, which is a good way to kind of situate all of you on what the novel is about. And she makes a little bit of, or actually quite a bit of a comparison between this novel and another novel that her and I worked on as far as a translation, which is I No Longer Like Chocolates, that I know Anthony has read and has enjoyed. And it's almost as funny as Land of Milk and Money, but not quite. And so here is the presentation, and what I will, of course, be reading will be from Kathy Baker, so please allow me that. So Kathy was born in and raised in Berkeley, and she earned her degrees from University of California at Berkeley and University of Maryland. And after discovering her paternal family's concealed Azorian heritage, Following her father's death, she began studying Portuguese at the University of Pittsburgh, and by chance she did meet me. She talks a little bit about me. I'll skip that part. And we of course worked together on translating I No Longer Like Chocolates. Kathy's roots are in the Azores, in the islands of Flores and São Jorge. Anthony Barcellos' Land of Milk and Money tells a true-to-life fictionalized saga of a family who left Terceira in the Portugal's Azores Islands in the early 20th century, settling in Tulare County in California's San Joaquin Valley. The family worked hard to build a successful dairy empire. Barcellos initially called this novel Dairy, a pun on Dear Diary, which fits his book's rural setting and its structure as a collection of distinct vignettes. A friend added the subtitle Drama, Scheming Cows, but the manuscript editor proposed Land of Milk and Money, which I like. An ironic play on, of course, Land of Milk and Honey, describing the promised land of abundance to which Moses led the Israelites. The expression land of milk and honey has also long been applied to California, especially because of the opportunities for agricultural success back when its prime farmland was still affordable and widely available. A friend of the author, as I said, proposed the title change, and here is, of course, the title of Land of Milk and Money, and here's the original title as well. And the publishers offered Barcelo three choices. His reaction: I saw the heifer cover and said to myself, "They must be kidding." Then I saw the pastoral cover and said, that is not California. It's too bucolic and tame, completely at odds with the novel's content. Then I saw number 3 and nearly busted a gut laughing. In a way, it's perfect. Suspicion, hints of schemes and dark doings, but too earthy. Bossy has a huge bag on her hocks and her hocks are stained with manure. As much as I like it, was over the top. So I scrambled back to number 1, where the heifer's undeveloped udder about the future. And then, so as you can see, the evolution of the covers. In summer of 2009, when Barcellos was writing his novel, he was still unaware of a canon of Portuguese American literature, let alone that his book would soon join it. He was a well-read, experienced writer, having previously worked as a journalist, served as a legislative aide to a state senator, and then on a state commission, written his doctoral dissertation, and co-authored a college textbook. But he hadn't published fiction before. The only Luso-descendant literary figure he knew was, of course, the late John dos Passos, who, save for one unacclaimed volume, did not write about the Portuguese heritage. And you'll see a few of the pictures there, of course, of the presentation of the book when we were allowed to do these things in person. Hopefully we will soon. The paternal side of the Barcellos family and their fictional alter egos, the Franciscos, left São Bartolomeu on the southwest state for California at the end of the first great wave of Azorean immigration. Whatever hopes they harbored of returning came to naught, however. The maternal side had earlier immigrated from Praia da Vitória, a place I like a lot, on Terceira's east coast. Praia da Vitória, where Anthony's mom, his family is from, and the Borges from Praia da Vitória, that is my birthplace. So we have figured that Anthony and I are cousins, and I've always wanted to be cousins to a famous author. And his family roots are from Praia da Vitória and São Bartolomeu, a very typical freguesia near the city of Angra do Heroísmo. In the late 1920s, Anthony Barcellos' grandparents settled in southwest Tulare County, west of Porterville. Other action and novel occurs in the towns of Tulare and Visalia. As you know, all of you who live here in the Central Valley know the area quite well. And the Barcellos contends that to a storyteller, and I quote, anything can be true in fiction, end quote. So when relatives urged him to preserve some family stories, he cast Land of Milk and Money as a novel rather than any nonfiction, changing names and details to protect, of course, personal privacy, and inventing anecdotes to enhance character development and to fill in plot blanks. He recounts the saga of a Portuguese husband and wife, much like his own, the paternal grandparents who received the necessary visa letter, Carta de Chamada, as it was called, through relatives already in America, permitting them to immigrate along with their daughter and two sons. And in California, the Barcellos raised their children, worked hard, building a typical Central Valley dairy farm, and prospered. After the first generation died, the descendants waged bitter war on one another over the inheritance of the legacy. A thinly fictionalized account of their struggle frames Land of Milk and Money. The widower of the matriarch's late daughter resented receiving nothing from her estate, although his children were well provided for monetarily, and this part is lovely to read. So I'm not going to give anything away, but it's just lovely to read. It called Louis Salazar in the novel. He sued to overturn the will. Barcellos characterized his grandmother, fictionalized as Teresa Francisco, as the family linchpin, the vital center without whom the family flew to Flanders, a wily old lady. Her will forced her two sons to cooperate as estate co-executors. Only a Zorian lady would do this. The less competent elder son was deeply aggravated by this and did not get to call the shots, but it was no accident his mother chose to clip his wings. The battle left scars remaining to this day, end of quote. Anthony Barcellos excels in evoking vivid images in a few words. For example, a wife dutifully fetching cold beer in like a remote control for the refrigerator. The process of assessing the likeliest male heir as a candidate for a Catholic clergy vocation is compared to medical triage. To say the Sierra Nevadas Serrat, a horizon compares the appearance of the mountaintops to sawteeth. Some single Azorian men immigrated to America alone, saved enough money to afford to marry, then sent for a bride from the Azores sight unseen, for a groom to choose her wedding dress himself, then ask relatives back home to fill the dress and send it back, was a hope for a wife who was neither too fat or too thin. The vacuum caused by a mother's death is called a mom-shaped hole. And the sudden jolt of a big tractor popping into gear feels as though the world jerked. And a little bit more that Kathy talks about, and is that the submission of this manuscript to Take Express prompted Anthony Barcellos to start exploring, of course, Portuguese American literature. When he read the description of Alfred Lewis's novel 60 Acres and a Barn, also set in the San Joaquin Valley, he feared his own book would add nothing to a topic Lewis had already treated. However, he discovered its narrow scope dealt more with individual dealings than with a multi-generational family, and it's totally different. I would actually Land of Milk and Money is multi-generational, and it is a story that's much different than 60 Acres and the Barn, although Alfred Lewis touched on some important themes. Charles Reis Felix, writing of in Through a Portuguese Gate. For those of you who don't know the term, Portuguese is Portuguese, not in a very complimentary term. Started him because of their similar episodic styles. Had he read it first, Barcellos said he would have thought his own novel influenced by Felix's, but instead the style was natural to both of them. And with respect to I No Longer Like Chocolates, he observed that intergenerational conflicts are natural in all families. Immigrant families have the additional aggravating factor of cultural transition, which is more alienating than a mere age difference. Thus, the conflict in both of these novels, of course, aren't merely typical, but almost stereotypical in our community. He added that his own family had some bitter people like immigrant patriarch Joe Sylvia in I No Longer Like Chocolates. And it is, I just want to add, because I know both of the novels well, and having translated with Kathy and I No Longer Like Chocolates, the Land of Milk and Money goes further than I No Longer Like Chocolates in many ways. I No Longer Like Chocolates is an immigrant family. And we learned about the immigrant experience, the leaving, and how the immigrant experience is dealt with from the immigrant's perspective. We never know much about how his four siblings are feeling, a little bit here, a little bit there, but it's all told by the immigrant, to where Land of Milk and Money goes beyond that and gives us the feeling of second generation and even third generation of Portuguese Americans, but certainly second generation Portuguese Americans. So it kind of completes the immigrant experience in beyond just those who left. And lastly, Kathy talks a little bit about the patriarch in I No Longer Like Chocolate could never stop kicking against fate, nor accept the unavoidable changes that life in America wrought up on his family. So his situation grew, and he became, of course, very bitter as a novel, as those of you who have read it. By contrast, the grandfather in Land of Milk and Money was a fatalist who realized change was inevitable and could frustrate his most cherished plans, particularly returning to Terceira. Yet he accepted what was outside of his control and chose to live as positively as possible. So his life was happy, comfortable, and full of things in which he could take pride. Both patriarchs were effectively exiles from their beloved island, but only one found a new home in America. And indeed, that's one big difference between the two novels. So a little bit from what Kathy talked about and presented at a conference in the Azores a few years ago. And so with that, we're going to talk a little bit about the novel in not comparing and contrasting with anything else. And I'm going to pass the microphone, as it's said in Radio Land, to Jean, who is a friend of Anthony's and who actually had the pleasure, and I do mean that, the pleasure. He may disagree with me, because it was going at a fast, rapid, at a faster pace than he probably anticipated receiving these chapters and receiving these pages. But Jean was one of the first readers of Anthony's work as Anthony was preparing and Anthony was writing this first draft of this novel. So Jean, first of all, welcome. Thank you for taking the time for being with us, with all of us that are joining us here on the webinar and also on Facebook Live. And tell us a little bit about that experience, how you came to it, and how you absorbed the writing of Anthony Barcellos.
Well, it was a wonderful time. Hard to believe looking back that it happened so very quickly. If you don't mind, I'd like to read some of the words I wrote down. So I'll be looking at my word processor, and feel free to cut in. Is that okay that I'm looking at it now?
It's fine. Yeah, we couldn't even tell you were looking at it. We just thought you were looking at
it. Well, then you don't know what I'm looking at. That's good. In 2009, I and Eric Buto were lucky enough to be the first two readers of Tony's pending novel. And boy, did we have to read. I've always remembered that time as being, quote, the summer of 2009. Eric has described it as 3 months during the summer. In fact, Tony wrote his novel in just about a single month, which of course is an absurd thing to say unless you know Tony. I first met him in late 1984 when I joined the Sacramento PC Users Group, one of the largest computer clubs in the country. A few years later, Eric joined the club. All three of us were enthused, interested, and could write pretty fast and pretty well. Let me read now a few memories from Eric Buteau, who wasn't able to be on this panel today. Eric says, "It's always daunting to write a book. I know that feeling well after authoring, co-authoring, or ghostwriting 41 computing books since 2000. But it's easier when you've lived the story and it bangs around your brain, demanding to get out. One day in 2009, my friend Tony Barcellos had enough of that banging. During the 3 summer months that year, on vacation from his real job as a math instructor, he wrote over 120,000 words in 3 months. That drive also carried Tony through the rest of the process, including feedback and editing, publishing the initial version on Amazon, finding Tagus Press to publish the book in 2012, publicizing the book, and today having the ebook edition published. I've been happy to help Tony during the editing process and self-publishing the initial version of the book. As I did, I quickly realized that the book hit close to home for me. At the time Tony was producing the book, my father and uncle were fighting over the future of the family vineyard in Northern California after my grandmother's death. And maybe you or someone you know may think Tony's book is more than a bit familiar too. That's why you don't need to be of Portuguese or immigrant descent to enjoy Land of Milk and Money. If you like drama and scheming with extra cows, then you'll enjoy this tale. And I wanted to fill in more about my early friendship with Tony in the computer club. Let me make it short and just say it was a really invigorating time, but let me jump ahead to August 2009. I was now living in Richland, Washington, and Eric was still in the Sacramento area. Tony alerted us that a book had been gestating in his head for more than a few years, and it was time for it to hatch. As he wrote his novel, he would email Eric and me each section, someday to be called chapters, as a PDF file. The first one arrived on August 10th of 2009. We typically read it soon after and send him back a list of any bugs we found or issues that needed attention. But really, there was never hardly anything to report. Tony's first drafts are pretty much ready for the printing press, or at least very close to that. Now, these chapters kept rolling in over the course of August. At one point, I quipped to Eric that Tony was writing his book faster than I could read it. For example, on August 15th, Tony sent Eric and me sections 17, 18, and 19, and also the family tree of all the characters as I had requested. Then the next day, 3 more sections, a little unnerving. And then on August 17th, 2 more sections and the comment, "Whatever will I do when school starts on Thursday?" I had no idea, but the book kept coming even after school started. I can take a break here, but I do have a few more minutes where I can go through some of the emails we sent back and forth while this process was happening. What would you prefer, Dennis?
Please do, please do, please do.
I'll carry on. Okay.
Yeah, carry on, carry on. We're enjoying it. I'm enjoying it.
Okay. For example, August 10th, 2009, in my message to Tony, this was after the first couple of sections. "So tell me, Tony, did you simply pull the dialogue from the court transcript? I know that would be cheating and unnecessary for you, but it's so crisp and logical that it made me think, well, that you must have copied it out of the court transcript." Ha, not likely, but I'm curious how much of the trial is literal versus novel. And a small point is that Tony has always insisted, look, it's fiction, doesn't matter, it's just all fiction, but it's based on his story. And so I was always wondering, how much of this is real versus fiction. I told him it was fun to read and promising. The trial took place in 1983, and you and I met for the first time the next year. So let me give you some ideas about how you might introduce me to your readers. It will be a real pivot point in the plot. I was enjoying this process, just thinking of all the possibilities. August 10th, upon hearing the proposed title for the novel. I like the Dear Dairy title. I'm wondering, though, if you'll have to use a nom de plume to publish it. Coincidentally, Tony's sister gave him similar advice. August 12th. Hey, I can't deal with all this reading. It's like homework. When do you go back to school so we'll get a break? August 14th. I caught up on my reading assignments. I hate these summer sessions where every day is like a week of regular school. August 15th, from Tony. You asked about output. I don't find writing particularly difficult, so yeah, stuff just flows. But this is also a quasi-memoir, which means I don't have to pace the room thinking of plot devices and incidents. The family history is replete with them. It's just picking and choosing and embellishing, or occasionally toning down things that just couldn't be true, even if they are. August 15th, from Jean to Tony. Okay, a request from a mere mortal. A family tree, a cast of characters and their relation to one another. I know, you can't imagine why somebody would need that. But yes, I was somebody who was getting lost in the number of characters that went through the story. August 16th. I felt like I'd been reading installments in the Saturday Evening Post, and now I wait expectantly for the next issue to appear in my mailbox. Tony's style works well for me. Almost no literary, quote, tail fins that a creative writing student might want to include, and Tony's very much is precision that makes for a coherent story that stays together for the duration. Seems to me that John Steinbeck went in that direction. He was part journalist, and a lot of his writing sounds like reporting without the flowery stuff. Something I guess I appreciate. Anyway, it's a kick to see Tony applying himself to such an effort. I suppose he could have 6 other ongoing efforts that we don't know about. Yeah, his teaching, the blog he writes, and a novel aren't quite enough. April 17th. I've been having great fun with all this, and it's not just your ability to crank out well-crafted sentences. I'd be interested in anyone trying to do what you're doing. It's a great thing. But your precision and your ancient powers of observation are making it a great read. And then August 20th. The stories of Paul becoming Paul are fun. If anyone gets a bit miffed at what sounds like bragging, you can assure them that you're not bragging at all. It's simply the truth. Then on August 22nd, Tony emailed a compilation of what he'd written so far, 216 pages in what is pretty much single line spacing. Jump to August 23rd. Tony said, I can't stay up late and do more because tomorrow is a school day. Arg. August 24th. Subject, I used to think I could write. Hey, Eric, this new Tony phenomena is great but unnerving. I could write my own memoirs, I'm sure, as I'm sure you could too, but for me, it would take a long time to finish a single 3-page chapter before I'd send it to a friend for feedback. Tony just sits down and writes it. The first draft pretty much nails it. He could be using paper and a pen. I suppose with very few crossouts too. In fact, I found a few spelling errors in the early chapters, meaning he didn't even bother to spell check it, like a circus act performing without a net, or as I like to quip, like Frankie Avalon performing without a net. And then from Tony on August 24th, all 3 of my classes are full. It bids fair to be a fun school year, except that I hate the fact 2 of my classes are in whiteboard rooms. Whiteboards leave your hands sticky and nasty. I hate them. Some of my young colleagues want to know when we'll finish getting rid of the nasty old-fashioned chalkboards so that all of our classrooms will have newfangled shiny whiteboards. The new department chair has sworn a mighty oath, never, or at least not until I retire. And then August 29th, 7:09 a.m. from Tony with 1 chapter attached. first fruits of the morning. And no, it wasn't on the list of sections, but it was in my head when I woke up. Now it's in your hands. Same day at 2:11 p.m. with one more chapter attached with a short PS. I know I just need to write part 77 to finish the entire draft. But skipping both breakfast and lunch was a bad idea. I need a break too, a tiny one later on. That night at 9:59 p.m. from Tony with part 77. Paul chooses Satan and lives happily ever after. That's it, folks. An entire first draft now exists. I think a second pass is indicated for proofing and for doing something about the lack of descriptive information about many of the characters, most of whom have hair-colored hair, eye-colored eyes, and skin-colored skin. I started this on the 11th, and today is the 30th. 20 days and 326 pages. Of course, 3 of those days were interrupted by accreditation. All-day meetings with the chair of the visiting team and staff development, 2 flex days. Still not a bad pace. There are 2 attachments. One is part 77, of course, but the other is the whole ball of wax, some 327 single-spaced pages. And finally, near the end, September 5th, I sent Tony an email. Dear Mr. Barcellos, please be advised that your recent contribution of chapters 20A and 59A to your novel Dear Dairy have used up 1 day of the 10 remaining days in your account at the Book of the Month Club. That was my take on writing a book in a month. An amazing feat. And Eric enjoyed that idea too, because we both sat through and read that entire 20-some day period. And then August went by, but then on October 9th, 2 new chapters came to me and Eric. And he said, look, these things happen. I can't control the muse when she has my arm twisted up behind my back, which makes typing very difficult. The section numbers are just placeholders. Where they'll go, if they go, is up in the air. All right, I was sort of exhausted at this point with the entire book mostly written. The story of the birth of Land of Milk and Money continued in small steps through the end of 2009 and into 2010, while it took another 2 years to reach the reading public on paper in a book. But Eric and I actually had the privilege and burden of reading it in its original electronic form, fresh off the computer. And here it is again, available to everyone on the planet in its new electronic edition. Congratulations, Tony.
See, Denise, I told you he would go on.
And I'm glad he did, because it was very entertaining. And I'm sure that everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you so much, Gene. It was great.
You're
fantastic. Welcome. Thank you. And we'll pass on to Daniel Mello, who is a high school educator in the Kerman High School, and who teaches English, who has put the book forth as optional reading for his students when they, as all of you know, English teachers are great at doing that. You know, here's what you are required to reading, but here's what you might want to look at other than what is on that syllabus right there. And so some of the optional reading. And so, Daniel, first of all, thanks for joining us, and a little bit of your thoughts on as a reader of the novel, and as someone who felt strong enough about it to put it on his reading list as a suggestion for his students.
Thank you, guys, for having me here to talk about this book. I'll talk a little bit first about students' responses. I don't have too much in terms of direct evidence, because this past year with the situation, we haven't been able to do what we normally do. But normally it's for my honors classes, and I have outside reading lists, and in addition to what the students do in class, they also have to do outside reading from a pre-selected list, a list of pre-selected books, and of course, Land of Milk and Money is one of them. 2 things consistently come up when this book is read by high school students here in the Central Valley, at least anecdotally for my students, how similar the Portuguese language is to Spanish, right? Because the vast majority of my students are Hispanic. So I use it as a little introduction to a little mini lesson in contact linguistics, because oftentimes, since Spanish is so much more dominant, at least here in California, they see Portuguese through the lens of Spanish, right? And so sometimes they see Spanish or Portuguese as perhaps a dialect or some sort of inferior version of Spanish, right? So there's that aspect. And then the fact that the students really seem to love the courtroom scenes, which was surprising to me. I didn't think that they would be interested in the drama of the courtroom scenes, but sure enough, that is what they do enjoy, obviously, because of the suspension. Excuse me, the suspense, not the suspension. And the third thing is the fact that it takes place here in the Valley, and they could, as you can imagine, a lot of the literature that they read, literature that we as a school, as a state, kind of not make them read, but put in our curriculum, right? Almost none of it is from the Central Valley. Almost none of it is from local writers. And so when they see a writer that's local, or that at least talks about content, about material, about stuff that they know about, whether it's agriculture, whether it's Tulare County, or whatnot, it's definitely, there's a lot more buy-in. So I wrote down a few words about my personal experience with the book and with the novel, and how I feel about it, how I felt about it. So yeah. So it was a simple search for Portuguese American authors, or maybe it was an advert in the Portuguese Tribune that initially led me to Anthony Barcellos' book, Land of Milk and Money. And initially when I saw it, I was dating a girl who eventually became my wife, whose last name was Barcellos as well. So perhaps when I saw that last name with one L, actually, not two, perhaps that made me more interested. Regardless of the genesis of the discovery, the book was a bit of a watershed moment for my reading of fiction. Though I'm an English teacher and an avid reader, ironically, I do not read much fiction outside of the classroom. It's usually almost all nonfiction, about 90% of my writing. But Land of Milk and Money quite changed the trajectory of my reading habits. It was one of the works of fiction that made me think, I can completely relate to this. And that doesn't happen very often. Now, a majority of my fiction reading is of modern local artists, or writers. So I leave the works from the canon in the classroom. I get enough of the famous stuff, the stuff from the English canon in the classroom, and the book introduced me to local writers, right? It made me think that, hey, there's a lot of good writing done by local writers. And so it made me seek out these writers even more. Land of Milk and Money was such an influential read for me that it made me do two things I had never done before or since. To start, it made me want to take a stab at writing a novel. That didn't last very long when I was hit over the head with the realization that writing a novel is difficult, very difficult, right? Maybe I should, like Jean said, maybe I should write a book about a family drama, something that's plot is already established and I don't have to think about. It's even more difficult when you are only writing on the side or as a hobby, much like Anthony Barcellos did. And we have to remember that this isn't his full-time job. He's a math teacher. And to find the ability and the time to have the ability and to find the time to write on the side is quite impressive. Second, I actually purchased additional copies of this book and gave them to people that I thought would enjoy it. I know this may not sound abnormal, but this is something I've never done before or since, and let me explain. Even though there are worse gifts to give than a book, I'm under no illusions that the people actually read them. As a matter of fact, I'm quite pessimistic about the amount of reading that most people do, and I'm almost certain that any book that I would buy for a person would just collect dust on a bookshelf without ever having been read. With that said, I still thought this book's subject and content and relatedness was too good to not pass up. And eventually I bought 3 copies and passed them out to 3 people who I'm fairly certain could identify just as much as I would, or as I did, to the novel. But why is this story so relatable? For one thing, I grew up on a dairy, albeit in the city of Chino, California, in San Bernardino County, about 200 miles south of Tulare County. However, almost every detail reminds me of my childhood on a dairy, from the Francisco's Massey Ferguson 50, which we had as a relic on the dairy, and always seemed like it was in like perpetual disrepair, right? It was one of those tractors that you just couldn't get rid of. It just sat in the shed as if it was a museum piece. To loading flatbed trailers with hay. For another thing, I'm Portuguese American. The descriptions of the festas do Espírito Santo and even the breakfasts of eggs and linguiça don't differ too far from my experiences as a kid growing up. Furthermore, as a future linguistics student, I experienced the very same linguistic mysteries of the universe that Paul talks about on page 39. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read this passage. And this is a personal passage for me. It's on page 39. Personal because, well, this was my thinking when I was younger about language, and more specifically about Portuguese. And this is probably ultimately what led me into a degree in linguistics in college. So at the top of page 39, I'll start reading. I have an older brother named Francisco. He said, really? That's neat. You know, lots of Portuguese and Spanish names are the same, or a lot alike. Paul paused for a moment. Say, does your family use nicknames? My grandfather uses Sheik because of our Francisco family name. His real name is Paulo. What did you say? Sheik? That's what my grandfather calls my grandfather. That's what my grandmother calls my grandfather. He borrowed the twig from Luis and wrote Chico in the sand. Oh, Chico, exclaimed Luis. That's what we call my brother Francisco, but I didn't hear the O at the end when you said it. My father says that people from the Azores don't like vowels at the ends of words, although they're there, so we just don't say them. I think he's joking, but it really is that way sometimes. The boys sat in the contemplation of the mysteries of the universe. Paul leaned down and obliterated his grandfather's nickname from the sand. Look at this, Luis. He wrote Xico. What's that supposed to be? It's my grandfather's name again. That's the way I've seen my grandmother write it. You're kidding. That doesn't make any sense at all. Paul was beside himself with delight as he explained. Sharing odd bits of information with others gave him the keenest pleasure. All right, so little anecdotes like that, little stories like that throughout the novel, and I could read about 4 or 5 more, definitely made this book very, very personal for me. So I'll continue. I'm fairly certain that it was these linguistic mysteries of the universe that ultimately led me to study, again, linguistics in college, right? But isn't this what good literature is all about? The ability to be relatable at a fundamental and emotional level. And I feel this is where the success of Land of Milk and Money succeeds, or is, excuse me. No, it doesn't break social conventions like Sons and Lovers or push linguistic structures like Finnegan's Wake, but that was never the point. The book has found its niche in the Portuguese American experience, thanks to its content, straightforward and relatable writing, and of course its candor. Thank you, Mr. Barcellos, for writing such an entertaining and relatable book. And sure enough, like Jean was saying as well, I always wondered what the reaction was from your family after you wrote and published this novel. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, Anthony can answer that, but it's on the back cover of the book. His sister Mary says, "I'm afraid you're going to get into a lot of trouble." So that kind of that's one bit of family history. But thank you, Daniel, and thank you for sharing your thoughts, of course, and our insistence in the Azores and certain islands more than others in cutting off those vowels. And we've talked about this in the class that Anthony is part of that we do. It not too many people know much about everybody says obrigado instead of obrigado. that just gets left behind. And so with that, we're going to turn over to the author, Anthony Barcellos, the author of Land of Milk and Money. And the novel is now, as Jean mentioned, in its ebook. And so we invite all of you, of course, to Anthony's going to read a little bit from the novel. And we are hoping that all of you will read the book. It is a fascinating book. I'm actually about 3/4 of it second time, I should say. It's because I read it when I first came out. I have my dedication here from Anthony when it was first launched, and we did a launching. He might recall in Tulare right after the 11 o'clock mass. So it's at the part of the Portuguese. The Sister City Foundation, Tulare Younger Sister City Foundation, put it together, and we had a very, very good turnout. And so that has been a few years ago. I'm excited, as Jean said as well, of seeing the book in its ebook format, because it's wonderful to have all these different ways of getting access to the novel. Anthony, thank you so much for writing the book. Thanks so much for telling a fictional story of that can apply to many Portuguese American families from the Azores and the Valley in one way or another. It may not be someone's total family history as far as some of the court scenes and everything else, but I think more important than one important thing about this novel is that there are bits and pieces of all of our Azorean families in the Valley. There's no Azorean American in California, I would even say, can read this, and even the East Coast, because there are some things that, of course, are not limited to geography. But there certainly in California, there aren't any Azorean Americans, whether you're first, second, third, fourth generation, even fifth now, that you cannot find some elements that you can relate to in various pages. So Anthony, once again, thank you so much, and thanks for taking the time to be with us in the symposium as we launch your ebook.
Thank you so much, Denise. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate your doing this. It is both a pleasure and certainly a kindness on your part. And I thank Daniel and Jean for participating. This feels rather like a celebrity roast, except I'm not really much of a celebrity. I've been called a famous author by Denise, and I'm not sure I'm that famous, but in my own little circle, I've gotten some very nice feedback for this. And it is a document about Azorean Americans in California. And that is certainly one of the goals. It is also a family document. And so noticing in chat that my brother has dropped a note, Boa noite, mãe. My mother is watching, so I will be on my best behavior. Of course, I always am. The point my sister made after reading the first draft, and she said, I think you're going to get into a lot of trouble. The point is that she is one of the people responsible for the existence of the book, because over many years, and all of us who are Azoreans or have met Azoreans are aware that we are inveterate storytellers. Lots of families indulge in storytelling, and not just Azoreans, but we do make a specialty of it. And more times than I can remember, either my sister, especially my sister, or someone else would say, oh, tell the story about this, or tell the story about that. And every time there'd be a new mix of people at a birthday gathering or a baby shower or a festa, whatever it might be, we would tell stories. And of course, a lot of stories came from the family breakup over Ava's will. And that part of Land of Milk and Money is very much the way a lot of it occurred. No, Jean, I didn't have a court transcript, but I was there for the trial over Grandma's will, for most of it anyway. And I've also watched a lot of Perry Mason, so what more do you need? The court scenes worked out pretty well. And one of my friends who was an attorney read the book and he said, "Did you have a transcript?" "No, I just remembered certain things and it seemed to work out okay." And the fictional part is very important because occasionally people forget that it's fiction, that it's fictionalized, and they'll say, "Oh, you made a mistake. Those two guys don't have the same eye color." "What two guys? They're characters in my novel. They can have any color eyes I want them to have." And so I took liberties for various reasons. One of them was to protect the innocent. The other was to protect the guilty. And you get to decide which is which depending on how you approach it. I had one person who wrote me a letter saying how much she enjoyed the novel, but proceeded to list things I got wrong because she knew these people. Well, she kind of sort of did, because they are based on incidents that really happened, plus things I just plain made up, because there were incidents in there that were bridging gaps. There were stories I wanted to tell that I heard from others. No, I never had a cousin launch a grain silo into the air with an explosion. Okay, that did not happen. Did someone drive two tractors at once with ropes and chains? Yeah, that really occurred. And who did it? I didn't explain that in the novel, though one of my first cousins, once removed, says, "That sounds like Dad." Well, you know, your father did do some of those things that I wrote about. So you collect these incidents, you bridge the gaps, because if I tried to write a memoir, it would be full of holes. I'm not actually omniscient, no matter what Gene says. So in dealing with those gaps, if you're going to tell a story, it's nice to know what's motivating people. Why do people have conflicts? Why do they behave in a certain way? So in a novel, you can provide that background. You can pretend you know, and for your character in that context, that's what you do. But many of these stories that I heard from others and then recycled took shape in my head over the years. And like Gene said, when it finally happened in the summer of 2009, I had just come off the accreditation effort at my college when I was co-chair of the accreditation team. And we had just put together a 300-page self-study document. And after doing that, right into the summer, I decided I was going to do my own writing for myself in August and churned out the first draft in that period of time. And looking back on it, it seems kind of amazing, but it was just pouring out of me. And I also enjoyed the fact that Gene and Eric kept begging for mercy during the process, and I didn't give them any. Because we talked about reading a short excerpt, I'm going to read a piece that I read in an appearance at Porterville College in my hometown. Mom and Dad were in the audience, and I think they were slightly embarrassed by it. And I know Mom is watching tonight, so this is an opportunity to embarrass my mother again slightly. And it's based on the courtship of my parents. And I heard bits and pieces about it, and I took those pieces and I fit them together, and I created a fictional event which bears some points of contact with what really happened, because my father and his brother met my mom and a school chum of hers at a festa in Southern California. And the two girls married the Barcellos brothers and moved up to Tulare County and lived semi-happily ever after. And so Boys Meet Girls is an early section in the book, and it's set in a festa in 1947. And one of the complications of this is that there's a character in here that many of my readers said they wanted to see again, but she makes an appearance only in this one scene because she's not the sister that married my uncle. And so she's not the sister who marries one of the Francisco boys here. But I will read ahead and you can ask me questions about it if you like. It is fiction, but it's based on a true story from May 1947, when the Francisco boys go down to Southern California. Breeding stock at 12 o'clock. Odile reacted to her sister's nudge. Ow! She rubbed her arm where Odette's sharp elbow had made contact. What? Where? Odette gave an exasperated sigh. Good-looking guys, straight ahead. The Avila girls were dressed in long pink gowns because they had been attendants to the queen of the Pentecost Festa. They had marched in the parade, attended high mass, dined on soupage at the long trestle tables in the Holy Ghost Hall, special area reserved for the queen and her attendants, and now they were free to wander and check out the other young people in attendance. There were fresh faces in abundance. Many Portuguese families traveled for miles to attend Pentecost celebrations in various towns. The Holy Ghost was revered as the special guardian of its 9 islands, and most of the Portuguese immigrants in California were islanders. The characteristically Azorean celebration of the Festa do Divino Espírito Santo had become an indispensable part of maintaining the immigrant community's unity and identification with the homeland. It was also a meat market. Unattached sons and daughters were herded to the annual festas in hopes of finding ethnically and religiously suitable partners. The Francisco brothers were decked out in their Sunday finest, taking a day off from the demands of milking cows in the Central Valley to sample the flesh pots of Southern California. As Portuguese boys flocked to the festa, more cows were milked by Timp Anglo workers on that day than on any other day of the calendar. Odette had spotted Candido and Paulino with an appraising eye. She wasn't scouting for herself. Odette already had her hooks deep into a boyfriend whom she would be prompting to propose within a month or 2. Odile, on the other hand, needed all the help she could get. Odette was determined to push her sister out there and get her matched up with an appropriate partner. Time was of the essence. Odile was soon to turn 19 and at risk of becoming an old maid. The Avila sisters were a study in unfortunate contrasts. Though both girls bore names from Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, bestowed by their father because he thought they sounded classy, it suited only one of them. Odette was tall, slender, and vivacious, while Odile was short, plump, and lethargic. Odette knew they reminded people of Mutt and Jeff, so her plan was to launch Odile into the midst of a promising knot of young men and then stand aside so as not to overshadow her. There you are. Carmina Suaz had emerged from the swirling crowds of young people and joined the Avila sisters. She was intermediate in height and weight between Odette and Odile. Carmina was conventionally pretty and wore her hair in a more successful version of the mid-length perm that Odile had adopted for the festa. She also had a well-scrubbed, wholesome look that set her apart from Odette, whose high cheekbones and fashionably bobbed hair gave her a more sophisticated aspect. Carmina inserted herself between the sisters and took each by the arm. Isn't this great? Wasn't the parade wonderful? Look at all these people. The 3 girls were a matched set of pink-gowned attendants, sorted in descending order of height and ascending order of weight. Odile was always happy to see her invariably cheerful school chum. She didn't know exactly why, but it was always more comfortable, less challenging, to stand next to Carmina than next to her sister. Hey, who are those guys? Carmina had spotted the Francisco boys, who were somewhat ill at ease, standing together and looking at the strangers surrounding them. Odette saw an opportunity. I don't know, Carmina. They're rather cute, though. Why don't you and Odile go over and talk to them? I'm sure they're from out of town. You should welcome them. Well, maybe. What do you think, Odile? Want to do it? I guess that would be okay. I'll go if you go. Odette tried to fine-tune the approach. Odile, you should talk to the one on the right. I think he's your type. Odette carefully avoided describing Paulino as the shorter brother. That would have gotten her sisters back up. The taller boy looks kind of sad, said Carmina, dragging out into the open the height issue that Odette had been at pains to avoid. You could cheer him up, Carmina. I know you could. You should set your cap for him, suggested Odette. But Carmina isn't wearing a cap, observed Odile in confusion. Odette kept the exasperation out of her expression. It's just a figure of speech, she replied. I read it in Gone with the Wind. Odette disengaged her arm from Carmina's hand, and nudged her friend and her sister toward the Francisco boys. Now go be nice to them. Make them feel welcome. It's the polite thing to do. Go. The girls giggled at each other as they moved tentatively toward the brothers. Paulino noticed their movement. Candy, it looks like we have visitors. Candido looked in the direction his brother was looking. I thought we were the visitors, he said. These girls are local. They were in the parade. There were out-of-towners in the parade too, observed Paulino, but I think you're right anyway. These girls were attending the hometown queen. Carmina knew right away that she preferred the shorter and younger Francisco boy. She figured they were brothers from their resemblance to each other, although the taller and older one had a high forehead that exaggerated his age and a long face that gave him a potentially mournful aspect. The younger one, by contrast, looked bright-eyed and cheerful. He had a nice smile, and his wavy hair was a shade darker than his brother's. She hesitated, though. Odette had made it very clear that the prettier boy was marked out for her sister, leaving the homelier one for Carmina. Did she want to cut in on Odile and get on Odette's wrong side? Would it be better to let Odile have first crack at the cute one? The moment she asked herself that question, Carmina had her answer. Let Odile go first. She was sure to mess it up. Carmina felt just a little guilty relying on her schoolmate's clumsiness, but it would be better than actively undermining her. Hi, said Odile. Hello, replied the Francisco simultaneously. Hello, replied Carmina. A long moment of awkward silence. My sister said she thought you were from out of town, said Odile, trying desperately to make conversation. She looked back over her shoulder as if to point out her sister, but Odette had vanished. Your sister is right, said Paulino. Candy and I came down from Tulare County for the day. Candy? Asked Odile. Yes, my brother is Candido, and I'm Paulino. What are your names? I'm Odile, and this is my friend Carmina. Not your sister? No, Carmina and I go to school together. Is your sister the tall girl you were talking to just a minute ago? Asked Candido. Yes, my sister Odette. She's very pretty, observed Candido. Yes, she is. She's the pretty one, said Odile miserably. All of you looked very nice in the parade, said Paulino, trying to turn the conversation in a more positive direction. Odile brightened at the compliment as she and Carmina simultaneously said, thank you. Yeah, you really did, added Candido. A couple of silent seconds stretched out. Carmina decided she had given Odile enough opportunity. She spoke directly to Paulino. So what do you and your brother do in Tulare County? As if you didn't know, laughed Paulino, as he and his brother exchanged amused glances. Carmina laughed. I'm sorry, but I was just trying to make conversation. All of them laughed again, except Odile. Candido noticed the confused expression on her face and felt a pang of sympathy. Paulino was always laughing at things he didn't get, and it looked like Odile suffered the same fate with her friend. What's wrong, Odile? I don't understand. Your brother, she didn't remember Paulino's name, said, as if you didn't know. But I don't know. What did he mean? Candido smiled at her, the first happy expression anyone had seen on his face that morning. Well, Odile, if you think about it just a little more, we're Portuguese boys at a festa. What do you think we do for a living? What does your father do for a living? What does Carmina's father do for a living? Odile wrinkled her brow at the challenging string of questions. Carmina's father has a dairy farm that he runs with her brothers. She paused. Do you have a dairy farm? Yes, you're right, exclaimed Candido. Doesn't every Portuguese boy in California live on a dairy farm? I think it might be the law. Odile looked concerned, but decided Candido was probably joking about the law. I guess you're right, she said, a smile appearing on her face. And what about your father? Does he work on a dairy? Well, we don't have cows, said Odile, but he makes his living hauling cow manure for fertilizer. Close enough. See, we're all in the dairy business. Carmina had been watching the exchange between Odile and Candido and was slightly startled to discover that Paulino had moved right next to her. There's a vendor over there with a soft drink concession. I'm getting a little thirsty and was wondering if you would like something to drink too, he said. Oh, yes. Yes, I am a little thirsty. That would be nice. Great. We can leave your friend here with Candy. They seem to be having a good conversation, and I don't want to interrupt them. Oh, okay. That's a good idea. Paulino and Carmina moved away slowly from Candido and Odile. Paulino was doing a good job of hiding his nervousness as he wondered if it would be too forward to offer his arm as he led Carmina over to the drinks concession. He decided not to risk it. He was happy enough that she was following him willingly where he wanted to go. Besides, if she took his arm, she might notice the hammer pounding of his heart, which was making his entire body vibrate.
Wonderful piece.
Boys
Thank
meet
you.
girls at the
Boys.
festa.
That's right. And that's the way it was and still is in some aspects. Much has not changed since 1947. I mean, it has changed tremendously, obviously, in the last 20 years, but it certainly did not change between 1947 and 1977. Let's put it that way, at least, and even a little bit later.
I'm
And
sure
so
festas still manage to function in this manner. Festas are still a good source of this sort of thing.
it sure is. Yeah, they sure are. It's going to be a different world, but they still bring in a lot of the Portuguese and it's a wonderful depiction of how festas and the importance of the different. Although 1947 was a long time ago, it seems like it wasn't. For if you're young, if you're 20 years old, that seems like a very long time ago. Some of our students joining us, but it's interesting how the different connections between the different communities, between the valley and Chino and Artesia and especially those areas and all of the valley between Sacramento and Tulare and Fresno and Los Banos, etc., and a little bit on the East Bay at that time as well. Daniel, do you want to add something to it?
Yeah, I was going to add, that was actually one of my favorite passages as well on page 33. Because the part where where the girls ask what what do you do, and it's so obvious, like, you're from Tulare, that's all you need to know. And in the minds of even though I was born in the 1980s in Southern California, when I thought of Tulare County, with all due respect to Tulare County, there was only one thing that came to my mind, and that was cows, dairying, and that was it. And then if you add another adjective, Portuguese in Tulare, the answer is so obvious. It's like the girls don't get it. It's so obvious that's of course what they do. Like, there's only one job available to us as Portuguese in Tulare. And of course, we're in agriculture, more specifically in dairying. So another testament to the authenticity of the novel.
Fantastic. Any other thoughts, any questions from the audience as we move forward? If I don't see anything's on chats other than I think your mom is still watching, I hope, Anthony, and she's a lovely lady, and a big shout out to her. And so to all of you following us, we'll end it here quickly, but I want to thank, of course, Jean and Daniel for spending some time. And if you do have some questions, we have a couple more minutes, so please go ahead and put forth. If you have not read the novel, please do so. Again, it's called Land of Milk and Money. If you have read it and you'd like to send us, even if not now, but any other time, you can get a hold of me or Anthony and send us your comments on it. I'm sure Anthony would like to get your feedback. That's always important for a writer to know how people feel after they write his, after they read his novel, his work. And Anthony, so now the book is available on ebook. We were saying that. Or Daniel was saying that, we leave the canon, in a classroom, but this is actually Portuguese canon here. This is part of the Portuguese American canon right now. And there aren't a lot of works of fiction in California, but there are more and more. And I think that it is also enticing and important for young Portuguese Americans who are thinking of writing, not to feel that they can't do it, or that if they have a story that they'd like to put forth, try it, and read and read and read, as it's known. A good reader, a writer shall make. So go ahead and read and read and read, and especially works like The Land of Milk and Money. There's a question from Debbie that asks, what is your favorite memory story from the book?
That's a great question from Deb, because it gets to the root of one of the important things about the novel, which is it serves in a very significant way as a tribute to my grandparents. I mean, when people pick up their family and move thousands of miles to seek a better life, that bespeaks a certain kind of bravery that a homebody like me has difficulty understanding. And so the parts of the novel that pay specific tribute to my grandparents are among my favorites. And instead of Boys Meet Girls, I considered very strongly reading the section called Teresa Gives Free Advice, where the matriarch, Teresa, or Teresa, if you pronounce it properly, when the son spends a lot of money on an expensive farm consultant, and his mother just sort of casually drops the suggestion that he just paid a lot of money for, and she gives him for free. And it indicates you are trifling with people who know what they're doing, and you're not benefiting from bringing them in to the operation. And it isolates one of the characters, and it shows the degree to which the matriarch understands what's going on. And the crafty old lady at the center of the plot, who is based on my grandmother, has my grandmother's characteristics of wisdom and insight and just sheer stubbornness in sticking to the mission. She wanted to go back to the island so badly, but she couldn't. So she made her life here, and she made a successful life here. And so, Deb, one of my favorite pieces is Teresa Gives Free Advice. And that's an especially significant piece of writing, because it encapsulates my grandmother's qualities so very, very well. So thanks for asking that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anthony. And for those of you, I had a question earlier, but wasn't on here. Was someone, yes, I think, I don't think I know, Anthony did attend Fresno State as master's student, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Correct. Yes, I was there 1973 to 1974.
Did his master's at Fresno State, so he is part of a bulldog as well. For those students who are from Fresno State on the webinar, I just wanted to, as we end, again, thank Anthony, thank Jean, and thank Daniel. I want to also just give you a little quote from one of the blurbs. There's various here, and they're all very interesting on the printed edition. But this one, I think, is gives a little bit of a. It was special to me when I first read it, when I first saw the book and read it when it first came out, and it still continues to be very, very relevant. Which is, and I quote, one of the West singular migrations from the Azores to California's Great Central Valley is given faces and voices in Barcellos' new novel, Land of Milk and Money. Along with its triumphs, the Francisco family embodies the challenges to an immigrant family in their new land, including the often ignored difficulties posed by success and the loss of the old culture. A must read. And I think that this is end quote. So I think it kind of encompasses what the novel is about, because and it's Gerald. I hope I pronounced the last name, Haslam.
Haslam. I did meet him and thanked him for the quote, and he said he was 1/8 Portuguese, so he took special pride.
Oh, fantastic! And he's the author of the great Central Valley. And that is indeed, and that is exactly what Anthony was just saying in his last comment there, in answer to Deb, and that is that. And before I make my comment, I must not forget. I just have that Lisboa is watching too. That's true. Miguel Vaz says hello. And for those of you who don't know Miguel Vaz is a director at the Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, FLAD, one of our sponsors. And so thank you, Miguel, he's been accompanying every single workshop, whether they are at 10 in the morning, at noon, or at 5 p.m. And mind you, at 5 p.m. now, 6:15, it is 1:15 in the morning in Lisbon. Thank you, Miguel, for your dedication to the Portuguese American communities. I keep on saying it because it's true. You are the person at FLAD that connects. You're the umbilical cord between mainland Portugal and the communities in the United States, and especially with the Azorean community, because Miguel lived in the island of Terceira when he was working there for a few years, and he understands what Azoreans think and feel. And one other comment as well, which is from Samantha, saying, I'm excited to read this book. Thank you to all the panelists. Samantha is one of our students at the College of the Sequoias. And I didn't, and Millicent commented that she did not know that Gerald was 1/8 Portuguese. Well, that is one of our issues, as you well know, my dear poet, Millicent, and that is that, how many of us there are that we really don't know there are. It's just, that don't identify. But I think that my comments were that it gives faces and voices, and that's what we have been lacking in the Portuguese American community, faces and voices to the immigrant experience. And today, this book, of course, is very relevant. It'll be relevant 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, forever, because we must continue to talk about the immigrant experience. It is, as a famous congressperson says here, the immigrants past, the immigrants present. And although, Anthony's family, we're talking about his grandparents who immigrated, and my family was myself who immigrated, my mom and dad as well. And Daniel's family was his parents and his grandparents. And so the immigrant story continues today. And it is important for us to give faces and voices to the Portuguese American experience that has been for far too long kind of forgotten in the valley, and Land of Milk and Money gives us that voice. And as Steinbeck once was famous for saying when he wrote The Grapes of Wrath, he was, as we all know, part of the story, which was he was contracted to do a series of articles on the migration, and he stopped doing that, and he said, some things can only be told in fiction. If I wrote an article about this, people wouldn't believe me. So some things can only be told in fiction, and thanks to Anthony for doing this work of fiction that tell a lot of truths about the Portuguese American experience in California. Anthony.
Muito obrigado. Thank you so much, Denise. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Daniel, for helping to make this special. It was a lot of fun. Thank you to all the participants. Hola, Miguel. I'm so delighted that you're here. And Millicent, people whom I know. And I will say, boa noite, mãe. And my brother, boa noite, moi.
We just thank you so much again. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Anthony. And just a little bit of a programming note for all of you, because the symposium continues. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, we have the mayor of Angra do Heroísmo, Tulari's sister city, talk about Tulare. Alamu Menezes was fascinating. It'll be in Portuguese. And he's going to talk about how the sister city movements can hopefully foster a little bit more of a connection between the Azorean diaspora and the Azores. At 12 o'clock, we have something called Os Primos da América, the American Cousins. And it's connecting younger generations. We have 3 folks from the communities and 4 from the Azores, all young, all in their 30s, who will be talking about ways that we can connect the diaspora to the Azores and vice versa. And then at 5 o'clock, we come back to English, and it's called, the part of the theme, the title is in Portuguese, is called Das Ilhas, and that makes a lot of sense to those who are from Portugal, because we know what this means. Das Ilhas, and so means literally from the islands. When people ask you where you're from, Das Ilhas, it's just that's what people use in the Portuguese American community, from the islands, like everybody knows where the islands are and which island they are. And it's called Azorean Identity in America. So we have 4 Portuguese Americans, all immigrants, who came at, I believe, one of them at 3, one of them at 5, one of them at 10, one of them at 13. So they came at a very young age. and they're going to talk about how they keep their identity alive, even though they've been here 50 plus years. So that's for tomorrow's program, and then we will end on Wednesday. Thank you all again so much. We appreciate all of you. We appreciate the contributions of Gene, Daniel, and Anthony, of course, our guest of honor, and we appreciate all of you being part of it. Thank you. Have a good night. Boa noite, as Anthony says. E boa noite para a senhora Barcellos. Good night. Thank you all.